It's funny how some decades you remember the beginning of. I really remember the end of the 70s and the thought of going into the 1980s. I was still very young at the time, I was a teenager, but to me it seemed a very exciting time. And with cameras, it was quite an exciting time. You were going from a sort of traditional type of rangefinder and single lens reflex camera into more automatic and newer types of mechanisms and design. And the camera I'm going to talk about now was very much a new design concept when it came out. And it's this. It is the Olympus XA, and there we are. It's a lovely camera. It was completely new. I remember when I first saw one, which wasn't probably until about 1981, 2 years later, and I was just couldn't believe how nice it was in that we've got such a sensible design here that we have a camshell that covers the lens. Now, there's lots of really interesting things about this camera, and it marks an interesting step between sort of manual cameras and automatic cameras. I've had a couple of these in my time, and I hadn't used it for a couple of years. And when I came to use it this weekend to test it for this video, I was impressed with the images I got from it, which I will talk about later, but I wouldn't say I was confused. I had forgotten what a manual camera it was in many ways when you compare it with the MU, which I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, and again it's a camera I really like. So there's a number of XAs. There's the XA, the XA1, the XA2, XA3 and the 4, and they are all a little bit different. This, you could say, was the father of them all. And it's the unique with the 4 that it's a rangefinder. Automatic focusing was coming in, but it wasn't universal. So this camera was a rangefinder, and you control the rangefinder from this little lever at the bottom. Let's start loading the camera. To load the camera, you have to have the lens close, and it's a simple case of flipping, moving up, and there we have the back. Now it's interesting that I will put a new felt on here, and it's interesting it didn't leak, because just examining this now, it really needs a new felt. Right, cassette in there, 35mm cassette, and over, and load it manually. There's no motor wind. The only battery in this camera is at the bottom here, which I think is a 44LR, and it's in all 13 AG, and it's a very common garden battery, and it's in there, and the battery, just the shutter and the metering, but there's no motor wind. It's manual. So we load the film manually, and we wind on to 1, and then to use we have the rangefinder that I've talked about here. And a really nice thing as well is, let's say you were taking a photo and you sort of look above, we have looked down to the camera, we have the distance as well, so we can focus, and then we can see the distance, and we've got a red 8 for 8 meters as a sort of average. If we wanted to do street photography and we weren't too sure, we'll just put it on f8. Because a really nice feature of this camera is the lens is the 35mm, so it's moderately wide angle. If you think of the nifty 50, which is the standard lens, 35 is a lot wider. So we have a nice wide angle lens, which is fantastic for street photography, for parties, for snapshots, for landscapes. So we have a nice lens there. We have to manually set the ISO down here, and it's a moderately fast lens. It's a 2.8. So that is all good news. Haven't talked about aperture. On a lot of cameras it was just automatic aperture. This is actually Aperture Priority. We have at the front our f-stops here, and we choose an f-stop, and then when we look through the window we have a needle against shutter speeds. And for example, in this room now it's telling me 1/8 of a second because there's not too much light. So this is Aperture Priority. And if you think about being in charge as a photographer, the aperture is so important on your depth of field, and is often what you think of first. Well, it was in the 1980s. Aperture Priority was a big thing then, so here we have Aperture Priority on a compact camera. So we also have the benefits of the flash which goes on the side here. So you can see this is totally a different type of design and a slightly different way of thinking. Let's see how I got on when I actually took some photographs with it. These first photographs are taken in the wonderful town of Wareham. Wareham is right by a lovely river called the River Frome, and it's a very historic town. I was pleased with the focusing on the camera. I'm shooting a little bit into the light, which can cause problems. I was pleased with the tone. It did take me some time to get used to this camera because you do have to manually focus and you do have to set the aperture you want to use. And although that is straightforward and simple to do, when you are used to a compact camera doing everything for you and you are handling something which is a compact camera and it's a very small camera, and yet as a photographer the brilliant thing about this camera is you have a lot of control, and the lens is sharp, it's super sharp, it's a moderately fast lens at 2.8, and it's got this nice wide angle vision on it. So for things like this, for street photography, for photographing the landscape, for town, it works really well. This might seem just to be a little bit of a mound of grass, but it's actually part of the old wall of Wareham. These ditches went all round the town. Really pleased with how these cosmos flowers came out here. The contrast on the lens is good, the sharpness is nice, and again I remember thinking, I think I took this at f.8 and I realised that I was getting some nice shadows on this shed here, but just as I was about to click the button the sun changed and I didn't get any shadows, so I had to rate around, and eventually the sun got back to where it had been and I got these quite nice shadows. I then did a short walk in the Frome Valley, and this is down by somewhere called Lewell Mill. I have slightly burnt in those clouds, but again really pleased with the sharpness of this camera. This camera is, as I might have indicated already, a real joy to use. It's a fantastic travelling camera. You can put it in your pocket, you can put it in a rucksack. It is built for travel. It's the sort of camera you could almost keep on with you all the time, a bit like we normally do with mobile phones now. I'm still a fan. Yes, these are not the easiest cameras to get any longer, and they do go for a bit of a premium, but I think if you get a good working one, they are well worth it to this day. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.